Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Chacon, and welcome to ChatterConf 2021. I apologize for the delay there, trying to figure out the backstage thing. I'm sure we'll have a number of interesting things as people come online, but I am joining you from the United States actually today. I'm in California. It is 1 in the morning, and I am super excited to be here with you. So welcome to the second annual ChatterConf. I'm excited about this day of language learning, of learning about languages and technology, this virtual conference. This is, again, the second annual. We started this last year right at the beginning of the Corona sort of lockdown times, trying to bring people that are trying to learn languages that maybe have to start learning them online for the first time, getting them together with tools and technologies from around the world that lets people learn languages in a new way with new technologies online. So this year, sadly, 1 year later, we're still sort of, many of you are probably watching this from lockdown. Maybe you've been trying to learn a language for the last year or so and are looking for, or you're just starting now. You're figuring, okay, well, looks like we still have some more time. Let's figure out how to do this. And this is a great event to do that. We have a ton of wonderful speakers that'll be on stage today, on stage here, and a ton of people watching from around the world. So ask questions in chat. Be sure to engage with all of the speakers coming up. I'm sure that they'll all be in chat as well. And I hope that you're all excited about this. So today we have language learning companies like our own Chatterbug, internet polyglots, linguists, a lot of people who have experience learning languages online to come and share their tips, share their stories, give you tips and tricks for your own language learning journey, and we can all learn from each other. Later in the day as well, we have some mini language lessons. So if you want to learn a little bit of Spanish or French or Igbo, we have a couple of little language lessons. So learn some language yourself today. We also have some pitch sessions. So some companies will be talking about their products specifically and tools that you can use to learn languages online. We have some networking as well, if people would like to do that, using sort of some of the features in Hopin here. And at the end, we'll have a panel discussion. So please check out the schedule, figure out what you'd like to hear about, engage with our speakers, engage in the chat with everybody else watching us online today. So I'm up first, and I'd like to talk a little bit to start out the conference, to talk about, surprise, language learning. My talk is going to be titled "The Past, the Present, and Future of Language Learning," and I've found that this is a fascinating topic for many years now. My background is not really in language learning. I did study some linguistics in college. I have learned a number of languages here and there a little bit, but I think my background is probably a little bit different than a lot of the people that will be speaking today. I wouldn't call myself a polyglot, for example. I didn't even really start learning any languages seriously until I was probably in my late 30s, right? I think my story, my struggle to learn languages in my 30s rather than younger, my struggle to do that, even putting time and effort into it, is what led me to start a language learning company in the first place. But unlike, I think, many of the amazing speakers today who can fluently speak multiple languages, that's not me, right? I can speak, I think German is my best. That's what I've been working on most recently, and where I live now in Berlin, even though I'm joining you from California today. But I'm a struggler, right? I'm not this wonderful, amazing polyglot. I'm sure whom you'll hear a lot from other people today. So I think it's this struggle that constantly motivates me, and it's one of the things I kind of want to talk to you about today, because many of you are trying to learn languages, many of you are struggling, And I think it's interesting to think about the history of language learning and the future of language learning, and what we're all here to learn about today. So I'm excited to be joined by all these smart and motivated and accomplished people from all of these amazing companies today. And I hope that you're as excited as I am to listen to what they all have to say. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what I feel is important in the language learning journey and why it's valuable to have all of these amazing speakers here today. My talk is about the past, present, and future of language learning and what it means for you. So first, let's start with the past. Seems logical. As you can guess, lots of people have learned languages in the past, and they've done it in lots of different ways. And there's been technology in language learning for a long time now. As an example, though, I'm going to choose one famous person and just tell you his story, right? And so I'll choose one person that most of you probably know of, which is Thomas Jefferson. I think he's a good example of the past in this case, because it's a quarter of a century ago, it's 250 years ago, and he was rich, privileged, and he had access to the best tutors and technology of the time, which in this case is books. So I want to take a look at the language journey of a fortunate person from 250 years ago and what that language learning journey looks like. So Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, who you'll know from the documentary Hamilton, where people burst it out into song, and it's highly accurate. Jefferson allegedly knew a number of languages, but famously, I think he knew French. He was one of the first American ambassadors to France. And although he learned French in school, and he owned a number of grammar books and dictionaries in French, he and others wrote that he struggled with French greatly, right? Until he became an American ambassador to France, and he moved there and he lived there for several years. So he wrote that even in that case, he had lived in Paris for 2 years, for several years, and he felt that he spoke French not much better than when he landed, right? He's written this. And he's also quoted as saying that the habit of speaking French can only be acquired by conversation. So he studied French, he struggled with it, he moved to France, he was there for a couple of years, you know, he still struggled with it. Here we have this man with, who I think is a great example of this educated guy with means, motive, opportunity to learn a language a long time ago. And to do it, he studied grammar and he studied vocabulary and he had tutoring. And then he picked up and he went to the country and he lived there. And he realized he couldn't really understand what anybody was saying, and he couldn't understand what nobody could understand what he was saying. And he stayed in this little expat bubble for many years, and he picked it up only very slowly and in a frustrating way. And I think that this 250-year-old story probably sounds familiar to many of you. It's essentially the same story that I have, right? I picked up and moved to France. I studied some French. I tried to learn some French. I moved to France. I lived in Paris. I struggled with it still for the whole year that I lived there, and I left not really still feeling comfortable in it, right? It's even immersing yourself in the language. I think a lot of people find that they, even if you happen to be able to live in the country, that it's easy to retract into this sort of expat bubble, right? And still become frustrated learning the language. So I think it's interesting to look at how far language learning has come. If we look at sort of the present, the past, present, and future, if we look at the present, I think it's interesting to look at how far language learning has come in the 250 years since Jefferson first picked up a grammar book in French. We have a dozen or so great language learning tools represented here today, which I think fairly accurately represent the present of language learning. And we'll hear from all of them. We have these wonderful digital tools, right, that help you learn words and grammar with artificial intelligence, with mnemonics, with spaced repetition, gamification, video chat, group chat, right? All of these things that we didn't have even a few years ago. But I think it's interesting to think for a moment about how actually different this is from what Jefferson used 250 years ago. Right? The books, the tutors, the teachers, the classroom activities are today's methods, are the tools that you're going to learn about today. Are they more efficient? Almost certainly, right? But how much? Are they more fun? In most cases, probably, right? But does it take a task that took 1,000 hours of deliberate practice, of speaking to people, of studying in Jefferson's time, and make it 15 minutes a day today? I would argue that it doesn't, that they're not, that these tools provide a better method of doing essentially the same thing that you did 250 years ago. And I don't want to pick on any of the wonderful speakers who are so generous with their time today, so I'll pick on my own company, Chatterbug, right? We have flashcards with spaced repetition teaching you vocabulary and grammar. We have readings, we have videos to practice listening to. We have one-on-one video sessions with people all over the world. We're, I think, highly technologically sophisticated, very optimized, very focused. But at the end of the day, is the way you learn French with Chatterbug really massively, order of magnitude 10x different than what Jefferson did? Probably not, right? You still study, you still listen, you still fail over and over, you succeed over and over. And at the end of the day, it's still hundreds of hours of work. Nobody, I think, speaking at this conference today will tell you some secret or unveil some technology that makes learning a language not be hundreds or even thousands of hours of work, of time, of patience, struggle. Right? In the realm of learning languages, if I'm being honest, the computer, the mobile phone, it's not hugely better than the printing press and a tutor. It makes things easier, it makes things more affordable, more fun, more accessible, but very little about the actual process of learning a language is that much different than it was 250 years ago. It took Jefferson hundreds of hours of work and real-time surrounded by real French before he could understand and be understood in the language. And honestly, it will be about the same for you. So, sad face. Well, you can ask, what about the future? Certainly, someday, technology will solve this, right? This is about the future. This is about technology, right? Something, a device in your ear, a pill, a brain chip will change everything, right? Certainly, someday, virtual reality or augmented reality or artificial intelligence will finally be the key to making learning languages easy, right? No, I don't think it will. I think learning a language will always be hard. Learning a language will always take time. I think it's important to think about it the way that you think about learning the violin, right? Learning to play the violin or the piano, or training to run a marathon, or anything else in life where you need to change subtle and complex ways that your human body and your brain functions and works. It will always be difficult. And on the other hand, it will always be worthwhile. Because the thing is, it doesn't really matter, right? Language isn't about vocabulary or grammar or tutoring, right? It's not how many words you know or how many points you get or how many exercises you've done. Language is about culture. Language is about communication. Language fundamentally is about conversations. It's about stories. It's about relationships. Language is about people. I want to tell you a little story from my life, my journey in learning German. Recently, I got married last year. My wife and I flew to Denmark and got married, and the officiant who's running the whole party, we had a very small wedding party, and everybody was speaking German. They were speaking German to each other, and the officiant asked us, well, would you prefer for me to marry you in German? And I'm American, my German's, B2 sort of level. And we said, you know what, that would be fun. That'd be cute. That's a good story, right? Yeah, let's do this in German. And so he switches to German, and he starts doing all of the wedding ceremony in German. And I'm following along. I've seen weddings before. I know the beats. I know what's happening. I can understand enough of it that I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. This is where we're going. I get it. And he gets to the important part, right, where he says, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" And if you've ever been to a marriage, I think you know what comes next, which is "I do." But if you think about it, as a native speaker, "I do" doesn't really make sense as a sentence. There's almost no other situation I can think of where you say "I do," right? It's not really that interesting of it almost isn't a real grammatically correct sentence. "I do." Like, when else do you use that? And so in my mind, I'm thinking, how do I just translate this? Do I say "ich tun"? Like, how am I supposed to respond to this question? How do you say, what is the cultural way of saying "I do" in German, right? And I didn't know. And so the way that I responded to it, because I'm on the spot, everybody's looking at me, is an important part of this very important ceremony. And I say "genau." And in German, that means essentially exactly, right? And so if you can imagine somebody getting married and somebody saying, "Hey, do you take this person to be your wedded wife?" And then the person says, "Exactly." Is essentially what happened, right? And so everybody laughs, and the guy's like, I'm gonna need something more specific, right? I'm like, I need to know what the phrase is. Somebody has to tell me what this is. And so they did, and we eventually got married. And but I think about this a lot from the point of view that this is a story of language learning, right? It's not about being perfect. It's not about translation. It's not about knowing vocabulary or knowing grammar rules or getting everything right. It's about making your life richer. And in the end, whether you're an A1 beginner ordering a beer at Oktoberfest and having this experience, or you're a B2 speaker like me, having slow conversations with your in-laws over dinner every Sunday, or you're a C-level, high-functioning speaker defending a dissertation abroad, right? Language is the bus. It's the transport. It's the mechanism that gets you to your destination. It's the means. It's not the ends. So to me, I would say that the future, it turns out, is the same as the past. Learning languages isn't fundamentally different from Jefferson's time, and it will never be. We can do it online, we can make it easier, but the journey is always going to be the same. And I think, likewise, if we look at the story of Jefferson, even though maybe he never really perfectly learned French, his relationship with France and his ambassadorship to France at that time may have changed the course of American and human history, right? His imperfect knowledge of French didn't do that, right? His engagement in the culture of France did. So don't learn to learn to experience. Right? Don't wait until you're perfect. Talk to people, build connections, make experiences. That's what language is for. So Chatterbug and all of everyone speaking for a language learning tool at this conference today, we're here to give you interesting new ways, new methods to help you on your path, to give you tools to build up those blocks, to have those experiences. Everyone here has something to help you make this a more effective, more fun, more efficient journey. But I want you to know that any of these paths aren't the destination, right? They're the goal. They're not the goal. Use whatever language tool that you want, using whatever language you learn, with whichever of us you choose. I think at the end is the goal. It's using that language that's the goal. So set a goal, set a path, choose any tool, right? But start opening your world, start making new experiences, start meeting new people. We're all here to help you. And honestly, it doesn't really matter which of these tools you choose, which of these methods work for you. Your path is going to be basically the same as it was for Jefferson, and it is a worthwhile, interesting, fascinating path that will change your life. And that is what I would like to say today. So again, thank you for your time. A big thank you from me to everyone here speaking and presenting, and watching and participating. I hope you enjoy the talks today. I hope you find something that helps you in your journey. I hope you become inspired to learn something new. So thank you very much. In Europe, I think Europe is one of the larger markets for language learning, because there are countries with very different languages that all interoperate in the EU in this useful way. And you can get on a train or you can get on an airplane and you can go you can fly for 20 minutes and land somewhere that has a very different culture and a very different language than what you have. Countries with very different languages that all interoperate in the EU. Sorry, I got some feedback from Megan.
That was me, sorry. No, I think we got cut off, but we're back on the main stage again, so continue.
Okay. Yeah, so in Berlin, I think Berlin's a great place in Europe, and Europe is a great market. This is essentially what that is. The problem with the United States, I think, we moved to Berlin from the sort of headquarters of our company from the United States, because it's very hard for people in the United States to have the need to learn another language. I think that you can get on an airplane and fly for 5 hours and you land in New York, right? And there's almost no difference from where you left. That's impossible to do in Europe. So I think the need to know another language, the value in knowing another language is much greater. It costs people thousands of dollars to get almost anywhere from the US where they can actually speak French or German or whatever. And so that's why I think Europe is a bigger market, and Berlin is a great place to do it. There's tons of expats. There's lots of people learning other languages there, and it's a great city to live in, which I do.
Totally. Yeah, agreed. Okay, next question is, how can I improve my pronunciation in British English, for example, or any other language? Do you have any advice?
No, my British accent is quite bad as well. So, no, it's actually not. My British accent's great.
Yeah, you're great at accents, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great question, and I'm actually not probably the best person to answer that to some degree, just because I'm not really super great at any of them. I mean, my German accent's not very good because my German's not very good. I think accents are very hard, but even like doing accents, I know lots of people who speak English that can't do other English accents, right? So it's not really a language thing. It's more of a mentality of, can you put yourself in the mindset of kind of what somebody like that sounds like, and can you even put yourself into the mindset of almost pretending like you're mocking them, right? Like you have to be not afraid of sounding like somebody that you authentically aren't, and I think that's difficult to do. I struggled with this when I was trying to learn Japanese, right, where you would essentially have to try to almost sound racist, right? Like almost sound like you're mocking somebody that is a Japanese tourist in California or something, if you're trying to say these words. And it's easier to just say them in the accent and the sounds that you're familiar with. And so I think kind of just being unafraid to step outside and sound funny to yourself even is helps with trying to improve your own accent.
Yeah. Okay, next question. So the process of language learning is unlikely to change, but do you think that new translation technology will in any way decrease the need for learning languages?
Only in a very minor way, I think. There are technologies that make a lot of things easier. For example, my wife is German, and her in-laws, that'd be my parents, her parents, English is okay. My parents don't speak any German, and so when we've done a family call, and I was thinking it would be really nice to have some sort of auto translation in there, because otherwise it's my wife and I sort of translating for our parents as they're trying to have a conversation together, and clarify things. And I think for circumstances like that, where people are still struggling with the language but really want to communicate in the short term, or where you're traveling. I've been traveling a lot where I happen to be in Italy, right? And that's just not one of the languages I've been studying, and so it becomes difficult. So having a Google Translate earpiece or something, I think is valuable. Although in those cases, I don't think it replaces learning languages, right? It replaces pointing and gesturing, right? In a better way, which is kind of otherwise what you're left with. And does reduce frustration. But I think people don't learn languages for things that you can use a translator with. The problem also, I think, with translation technologies is that, at least for real-time conversations, for the types of interactions that I think are really culturally significant and interesting, for getting married, for whatever, I think that you're always going to need, if you want to be in that moment, you're always going to need, it's always valuable to learn the language, because otherwise the best that technology will ever really truly be able to do is to come close to what a human translator, the experience using a human translator is, which I've also done in Japan. I've had translators around with me and do press interviews and things like that, and it's not a good experience, right? And so technology will only ever really get that, it will not get better than a human doing this, and a human doing this is actually not a good experience. So you have to do it in your head if you really want to have a good experience, and you really want to be in the culture, and I think that's what's important.
Definitely. Everybody loved your wedding story, by the way.
Good now.
Okay, next question we have here. So do you think that we will need a guide or a teacher in the future of language education, or do you think we can move towards these like self-learning models without a guide or a teacher?
I think it depends on you. I know there are people speaking today. I think Gabriel is speaking today, who does a lot of this by himself. I think a lot of polyglots do this by themselves. They do it over and over again. I think a lot of people find value in speaking, so I think you need somebody to practice with somehow, whether it's going to that country or finding a tutor or something. I think a lot of people can be self-led, but it's exhausting, right? I think if you can, it's easier to have a guide of some sort, or to have a system that you're using. I mean, when I learned French, my process was very ad hoc, and there was a lot of overhead of finding tutors on italki, of connecting over Skype and sending PDFs back and forth, and trying to find videos that were level appropriate on YouTube, and kind of doing my own flashcards and like writing them out, or using Anki or something like that. And I think a lot of people have, those are great tools. All of them are great tools, but there's a lot of overhead in putting them together. The reason that I started building Chatterbug was just to simplify all of that, so the next person doesn't have to do all of that work. So it's totally possible to do by yourself. It's totally possible to do relatively free. I think finding people to practice with is somewhat more difficult, although we have a speaker here from Tandem that you can do that in a more affordable way as well. But it just depends on how much time you have and how much overhead you want to deal with. I was always frustrated with spending time on things that weren't learning languages, right? When I was trying when I'd set aside an hour a day to try to learn French, I didn't want 15 minutes of it to be organizing my French learning, right? Instead of just learning French.
Totally. Okay, we have a couple more questions for you. So do you see different approaches in learning for fun and learning for necessity? So for instance, needing to pass an exam or something like this.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely motivational differences, right? I think a lot of people learning for fun also don't necessarily know how they're doing, right? Or they find it hard to continue to stay motivated for the amount of time it takes to get to the higher levels of really being able to feel comfortable with native speakers speaking fluently to each other. Even I struggle with that now. I've been doing this for a while. I've been living in Berlin for a while. My wife is German, or our friends are German, right? It's still hard. And I think, if you have a goal, it really helps to focus you. If you have a system, it really helps to focus you. And to make sure that you know why you're working hard at it every day. I think if you're doing it for fun, it's easy to be like, you know what, who cares, right? This is really hard, and it's hard to see improvement after a while. Like, when you're getting to A1, that's one thing. If you're in the B2 level, there are things you don't understand and you get frustrated, but you work and work and work, and the relative difference seems very small, and it's hard to stay motivated to do that, I think.
Totally.
But I think almost everybody at this level, right at the sort of high B levels, hits this. Everybody finds something where they think they hit a plateau, right? And I don't think it's true. I think it's just hard to see progress after a while. So yeah, definitely having a goal, having some test you're trying to pass, or some project that you're trying to do in the language, I think is motivating and helpful. If it's just for fun, then it's very easy to find a reason to stop doing it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions here. So we have another one. Speaking is difficult as you need to quickly translate in your head as you think of things to say. Are there better ways to address this rather than associating a known language to a new one?
There are probably other speakers who can answer that linguistically more accurately than I can. Anecdotally, I find that I fairly rarely, at least at the B levels, or even when I was doing sign language in the B levels, I would very rarely be saying an English sentence in my head and then trying to translate every word. I think that's kind of, at least in my experience, it's more of an A level thing, right? Where you're putting the sentence together and translating word for word. I think after a while, you just start speaking in the language, right? And using patterns that you're familiar with. And I personally, I don't know that I do that a lot. I will sometimes directly translate it and it'll come out kind of sounding funny, but my wife will do that too. And she's, C2 English, right? She's a highly, highly fluent English speaker, and she'll still say German idioms or something that are just directly translated into English, and be like, does that not make sense? And I'm like, I know 100% don't say that. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so it's, yeah, I think, at least for me, and I think a lot of people that I know, you get to the point where, I think my wife doesn't think about speaking in English anymore. When I'm speaking in German, when we do our German weeks or whatever, and we're just speaking in German all week, I don't really think about speaking in German. I get frustrated sometimes when I don't know a word for something, but I'm not, every sentence, I'm not being like, okay, here's the next 10 words I have to say in English, and I'm going to translate one by one. So I would say that that for most people, it becomes natural.
Yeah, there's also just not a lot of, there's a lot of non-translatable words in German to
And
English as well.
I would also say that a lot of that depends on how much you're speaking, right? If you're studying and studying and studying and watching videos and stuff, and you're never really actually using the language, you're not connecting over video with somebody and practicing, or meeting somebody at a meetup or whatever and practice. Well, can't really do that as much now, I suppose, but or have somebody that you can practice with. The more you speak, the more natural it becomes to speak, no matter what language it is, or how long you've been learning it, right? It's just, you get good at what you practice, so practice what you want to get good at.
Totally. Okay, next question. What are the top languages people want to learn in the next years from your experience?
So, I mean, Chatterbug offers French, German, Spanish, and English. I think, from a global perspective, English is ironically, the phrase in English that we use is lingua franca, which is the French language, right? Because that used to be sort of the language of travel and education. And before that, it was German, and now it's English. And anywhere that you go, there'll be stuff in the local language and in English, at least, right? That's kind of, I've seen German and Japanese people speak English to each other when I travel places. And so I think English is always going to be important, because it has, for better or for worse, and I can say good and bad things about the English language in general, but it has become the lingua franca. And so I think, even though Chatterbug, most of our students are English speakers learning, or people learning German. A lot of that is because we've marketed mostly in Germany. but we're seeing more and more people try to learn English, and I think that that's always going to be a large global necessity.
Yeah, agreed. What do you think about remembering whole sentences, especially in combination with spaced repetition?
For me, the learning entire sentences, I think it's useful from a pattern recognition standpoint, and it's been very, very helpful in being able to reapply rules to other sentences, like if you learn a specific sentence structure. And we do that with spaced repetition in Chatterbug. Like we have a lot of learn a snippet, a phrase, right? And I think this sort of phrasal learning is a really good way of learning grammatical rules, as opposed to just explicitly studying the grammatical rule and then trying to apply it to places. And so I think it's very valuable. I actually think it's very valuable to learn vocabulary that way as well, to not look at a word and then figure out, okay, here's the translation of that word and try to memorize it that way, but to see a sentence that word is in, or a video where somebody's using that word, and have the context of the rest of the sentence to help you figure. I mean, a lot of times you can figure out words from context. If you know all of the other words in the sentence, you can figure out what the one that you don't know means just from the context of what is being spoken about and how it's being spoken about. And so I always feel like context is valuable.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, last question here. So it feels like at some point language learning becomes similar to other building good habits of learning strategies. For example, learning the piano, working out. What do you think is unique about language learning strategies versus these others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways they're identical. It's about a habit, right? It's about building a habit. It's about trying to do it every day. It's about not giving up or getting discouraged when something doesn't go the way that you want. I mean, the nice thing is you can't get injured. You know, very easily. I suppose you could sprain your tongue or something, but like it's relatively difficult. I think you can always practice a language, right? It's even if you're sick, online, or there are ways to listen to practice speaking. And so, but I do think it's very similar to those, where you have to set goals sort of constantly. You have to figure out how to keep yourself motivated. You have to set up, I mean, you don't have to set up a habit, but I think it's very valuable to set up some sort of habit forming device, because otherwise, like I'm saying, or like I was saying before, it's very easy to get demotivated, right? And so anything you can put into the path of your journey to keep you motivated for the very long period of time that it honestly takes to stay motivated, or to make real progress. Like you have to figure out something that will keep you doing it for years, if you really, really want to get good at it. And it's the same with playing the violin, right? Like, I mean, you have to do that shit for years before anybody would ever want to listen to you do it, right? It's a very, at least language, you can learn a couple words and go and say it to somebody, and they kind of feel nice that you tried, at least, right?
Definitely. Okay, well, I guess that is the end. Thanks for everyone who submitted some questions. A lot of people are asking if these are going to be recorded. Yes, all of the sessions will be recorded, and we will send out the links after the event, probably within a week. So yeah, stay tuned for those. All right, Scott. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you again later in the day.
Yep, I'm excited about the day, and thank you everybody for coming, and thank you to all of our speakers again.
All right. See everybody back here in a few minutes for our next speaker.
Tschüssi.
Cheers.